Israel and Trump on the one hand, that has grown used to having its wishes ignored by Netanyahu. I mean, the latest example of that is that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, signed off, apparently, according to Middle East Eye's reporting, on the on the release of Marwan Barghouti, only to have that name struck off by Israel. Now, this has happened. This is a process that's happened many times before. We've had 2 or 3 ceasefires arranged by Witkoff that have been sabotaged by Netanyahu with no further comment from Witkoff.
I mean,
So
so
they seem to
even
allow this process to happen.
even with that, it shows that even the first phase of the deal that we're told has been agreed hasn't really been agreed. But let's just take this deal at face value. Does anyone win from this deal? Any of the parties involved? Maybe we start with Israel. Has Israel achieved its stated goals over the course of this war?
Well, it hasn't destroyed Hamas. Hamas has got as many fighters as it needs now, and probably as many as it started the war with, because of its recruitment campaign. Hamas has had 3 sets of leaders wiped out and assassinated, but it's retained its institutional integrity, its command and control. Significantly, none of the hostages have been released unilaterally by any of the various groups that could have released them in exchange for some sort of personal deal with the Israeli authorities, but that hasn't happened. So they've retained command and control. They've changed their leadership 3 times. They've been able to recruit, and they've got as many arms as they need. So Hamas will not regard itself as a defeated or spent force. Obviously, the cost of that has been enormous. 67,000 lives in Gaza. But according to our reporting and to the polls, Hamas retains the support of Gaza, and even more so in the West Bank, and even more so in Jordan. So the further away you get from the front line of the conflict, the more the Qassam brigades rise to sort of legendary status. So Hamas won't think it is lost. The people of Gaza will also think that they have withstood a massive attempt, I mean, the most serious attempt to try and push them into the sea or into Sinai or out of the borders of Gaza, that Israel has ever attempted in its history, and certainly since 1967. And that's a long time. So to staying put in the land is an achievement in itself, when Israel has consciously tried to make that land unlivable by bombing the houses, bombing the schools, bombing everything that makes life sustainable, and starvation. Has Israel achieved anything? It can say that it has its force, its kinetic force has been so destructive that whatever happens now, Gaza will be quiet. Its Western Front will be quiet because no one will fight a war there for another generation. It can claim to have destroyed Hamas in the same way it claims to have destroyed, but I don't agree with that assessment, Hezbollah, or claims to have knocked Iran's military leadership for 6. I think all of these are tactical and temporary judgments, and that Hezbollah can recuperate, as indeed Hamas can, and as indeed Iran can. So, but they can claim that they've knocked a decisive blow and that they've enforced peace by force. The cost of doing that, again, is enormous, and the biggest cost to Israel is to its international reputation. And we can see that in the scale of the European demonstrations that have taken place in countries that are true supporters of Israel, or whose leaderships are, in Spain, in Italy, where there's been a general strike. Spain, I think, contributed 40 participants to the international flotilla. The flotilla wasn't just a Palestinian or even a Turkish affair as it's been in the past. It was a truly, as you yourself have been on it and realized, an international affair. And that again says something. And you can also measure this sea change in public opinion by the opinion polls in America. Even the political class is changing, and that's the last to change of any. But before, it was almost like a rite of passage for any American politician, and certainly a first-time Democrat member of the House of Representatives, to go on this annual pilgrimage to Israel, which was organized by the APAC, and a majority went. Now, a minority of first-term Democrat House members go on this annual trip. I think 11 is the last figure. It was 33 a few years ago. So it may just be now that to get your driving license as a new politician in the House of Representatives in America, it's not a good idea to go to Israel and become let Israel feed you with all the talking points in your career from then onwards. And I think the change of public opinion in America is probably the most strategic loss that Israel has had. However, the question then is this irreversible? Because what Israel is trying to do is construct another Oslo. And during that time, one of the main benefits of Oslo to Israel was that the international campaign for the Palestinian cause completely fell through the floor because there was, open quotes, a peace process, end quotes, in coming. It was all going to be negotiated. We all knew that nothing actually would happen with that negotiation, but it stopped an international campaign that had started with the first Intifada. Now, is this process going to happen the same time? And because there is some semblance of quiet or talks between Palestinian representatives and Israel on some sort of future aspiration, the whole thing is terribly loosely guarded or worded, will the international support for Palestine diminish? I don't think it will. I think a threshold has been crossed, and this change, the sea change in public opinion, is irreversible, and a lot actually is built on that. If you think about it, it isn't just words. It isn't just a question of opinion. It isn't just a question of narratives. We're not talking in sort of post-structuralist terms about a novel that's being created. It is going to affect the entire architecture and structure on which aid to Israel is built. Its arms supplies, its financial, the whole financial network. It's very difficult, as we've reported today, to truly isolate Israel. As our investigation into the sovereign fund in Norway has pointed out, even that organization is still invested deeply in firms that supply Israel with arms. This is going to take decades to unwind, but that process is starting, and I think that is the biggest loss to Israel, entirely created by the use of its own force in the Gaza campaign.
There is a risk I sense in what you've just laid out, which I think is worth pinpointing. Are you saying that there is potentially a danger that this ceasefire agreement could provide an opportunity for Israel to restore its damaged reputation, and for the conditions that have allowed this genocide, the occupation, the ethnic cleansing, for those conditions to prevail, but the visibility that it has had to disappear, for the public anger and the pressure for the end of this apartheid rule to disappear? Is that a danger to be aware of?
You're
saying you don't think that will happen, but I understand that. You don't think that will happen, but But is there not a
No,
danger that
I'm
it
saying the
could?
threshold has been passed, and this international campaign will carry on, especially if the ceasefire is limited to its current parameters. I think this change is irreversible,
Okay.
and it will be accelerated if Israel is seen to start bombing again. So I'm actually saying the opposite of that. That Israel will be tempted, obviously, to stop any concessions that it or feels it can make right here and now, and to stay with the 53% of Gaza. But that won't go down particularly well in any of the cities that have demonstrated for the Palestinian cause. And in fact, the more the leadership of Western countries say we want a Palestinian state, and the more there isn't one, and there's no viable path to a Palestinian state of any size, let alone 22% of historic Palestine, the more the pressure will grow. So I think Israel yes, Israel will be tempted to stop it there and start bombing again. But that will accelerate the processes that have already started in Europe and America.
It is hard to imagine this global momentum suddenly dropping, and at least regarding the flotilla, which you mentioned, David, I can I can repeat what I've been told by those who have been organising these flotillas, that they by no means intend to stop sailing as a result of this ceasefire, because the conditions of the genocide, of the occupation, those remain in place. David, I wonder if you can shine some light perhaps on whether Hamas stands to gain from this deal, because Hamas was, of course, excluded from the final negotiation stages, and yet they agreed. Why would they have done so?
To give, as Tamimi said just now, to give the people of Gaza a rest, because they do operate in a social context. Every family in Gaza has got a member in Hamas, and they realize more than anyone else just how much suffering there has been. They will say that they have traded the hostages for a declaration, if that comes, of an end to this campaign. However, what they've done in agreeing to release all the hostages at once, rather than in stages, is to forsake any leverage that they have over Israel. You can argue, on the other hand, that the continued retention of these hostages has been a burden on them, particularly for Hamas's reputation abroad, and has been part of the argument that has helped Israel blur the fact that it is Netanyahu, not Hamas, that has been reluctant to come to a ceasefire and has in fact sabotaged previous deals, possibly at least 7 times. So now that they've no longer got the hostages, no one will be able to use that argument against Hamas that they're as bad as Netanyahu. Other than that, I think Hamas can say it has withstood a massive onslaught, and that is an achievement in itself. But the real achievement that Hamas can point to is the change in world opinion, which was part of the strategy that Yahya Sinwar himself announced long before he launched this strike on October the 7th in Israel, i.e. that he intended to provoke Israel into creating such, in reacting in such a barbarous way, and with so much force against the whole Palestinian population, 2 million people in Gaza, that it would collapse Israel's international image, which is exactly what has happened. And that strategically is an achievement of the war. However, it has been at huge costs to Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but in 48, in Israel, and in the West Bank. And we're being a little bit myopic in concentrating all our attention today on Gaza, because, as all of us know, it's Al-Aqsa next, and it is the West Bank next. So, and that will also spur on this protest movement in the West that I have talked about, because it'll become very, very clear that Israel has no intention of allowing a Palestinian state to form, even if there is quiet on the Western Front in Gaza.
And finally, David, we have to just briefly touch on US President Donald Trump. He has clearly been gunning for a Nobel Peace Prize. Is this deal a win for him?
It's a piece of reality TV, and he's a reality TV man. He's a game show host. And if you treat Gaza like a game show, you can say, hey, this is primetime television, and I'm going to personally deliver these hostages, even though we know he's had no real effect on the ceasefire and the hostage release. That will be an event. It will be a piece of television, but he won't be making history. He won't be declaring peace in our time, however hard he rehearses those lines on the Air Force One over to Israel. And he will say he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for stopping not just the Gaza war, he'll claim, but basically stopping the whole conflict, which, as we have talked extensively over the last few hours, the conflict has obviously not stopped, because the occupation exists in a more brutal form and more Palestinians are displaced from their homes, more Palestinians are homeless than ever before. So the conflict hasn't stopped, but Trump will claim it has. If the Nobel Peace Prize actually gives this guy a peace prize, then they too are finished as well, because their reputation will be as destroyed as Trump's, or indeed as Israel's is.
David Hurst, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So the world wants an end to Israel's war on Gaza. International polling is very clear on this. Even polling in Israel is pretty clear on this by now. And the tentative promise of peace is definitely well received.
Yeah, I suppose it's ironic, because for Netanyahu and some of his far-right ministers, they would prefer to keep that window open of future military return to Gaza, whereas for the rest of the world, kind of, well, once you've got the hostages out, wasn't that your stated purpose for fighting all this time? So why would you go back in? So I think definitely a lot of tension and uncertainty over phase 2 of the negotiations after those prisoner swaps.
But perhaps even massive question marks over phase 1. So just to recap, on Middle East Eye's live show today, we are covering in depth the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. This deal establishes only phase 1 of a ceasefire. The durable, lasting, everlasting peace that Trump has claimed it will has not yet been established. So phase 1, primarily, it's this captive exchange, this prisoner exchange, right?
Yeah, and we know that negotiations for those are still ongoing. So Hamas officials have said that they're still negotiating over the list of prisoners to be released. Under the deal, we know that a total of 1,950 prisoners will be released. Of those, there are about 1,700 detainees taken since October 7th by Israeli forces. And then we have about 250 prisoners serving life sentences. And we don't know that negotiations are still ongoing for those. Israel's government has, in fact, postponed its convening to vote on that deal while negotiations go on. And some of the most anticipated names in that deal, so we're talking about Marwan Barghouti and others considered really important Palestinian figures who can really unite Palestinian civil society, we think are going to be much tougher to get out. And we know that a lot of Israeli officials have come out against that.
And then just to give people a sense of how drawn out that timeline is then looking to be, even after Israel publishes the final list of Palestinian detainees due to be released, in theory, the Israeli public have been told that they will have 24 hours whereby victims of those prisoners' alleged crimes can contest their release. And until then, the 72-hour window of phase one of this ceasefire will not even begin, and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza will not begin, and possibly the relentless bombing of Gaza, which has continued throughout today, will also continue and will not stop.
I mean, definitely there's a lot of moving parts to this. Even now, we know that bombing has not stopped. We also know there was a recent ambush by around 3 Hamas fighters on an Israeli military outpost in Gaza, I believe Khan Yunis. So I think this is also a time where, as uncertainties are continuing, both parties are trying to prove that they have the upper hand, that they've survived, that they are actually the victorious ones. But, you know, in the meantime, as you know, so many families right now on the Palestinian and Israeli side are waiting to find out, how the next 24 to 72 hours will go. And provided that the living hostages are safely released, then there is the matter of deceased hostages. And we know that there is a potential US, Israeli, Qatari, Egyptian, Turkish joint task force, which could be looking into where those remains are, because obviously there's a lot more left to be resolved logistically over the next few days. Yeah. So definitely a lot of uncertainty. And
we are trying to establish a live connection to Gaza, and hoping to bring live testimony of how this ceasefire is being received by the people who are, of course, most immediately impacted by it. But first, I think the next topic that we're going to explore regarding this ceasefire is something that David Hurst touched on in the interview we just had, which is how irrevocably Israel's reputation has been damaged by the 2-year war and genocide that we have all just witnessed, not just among the global public, who you have all seen protesting and sailing to Gaza increasingly over the past months, but also from the political elites who really make the decisions. Tamara, over to you.
Yeah, certainly. We heard from Trump's interview with Fox News that while on the phone to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he had said that people are loving Israel again now that the ceasefire is in place, supposedly. But that might be a bit more complicated than he paints, given the huge changes in public opinion over the past 2 years, especially in the heart of Israel's closest ally, the US. So here to speak to me about those changing attitudes, about how that could impact future US policy towards Israel, is Dr. Roy Casagranda, an academic who is extremely familiar with the history of imperialist and colonial movements. Dr. Casagranda, thank you very much for joining Middle East Eye.
Thank you for having me.
I wonder, Roy, what you make of Trump's comment that people are loving Israel again, because just a few weeks ago, we saw Netanyahu talking about Israel becoming a super Sparta that would have to be responsible for its production of weapons and so on. So do you see this growing isolation of Israel over the past 2 years as something reversible if it signs up to this agreement?
So the answer is complicated for 2 reasons. One, yes, it's true that there's been a shift in the United States. Polls recently have shown that more people in the United States are pro-Palestinian than they are pro-Israeli. And, that's a good sign for sure, if you believe that the Palestinians are human beings and deserve not to be genocided. Having said that, the political elite in the United States probably aren't on the verge of budging and going in the direction of believing that. But we're seeing movement like Hollywood actors who have shifted over to the Palestinian cause. I think in the imagination of the average American, especially younger Americans, but we've seen movement even in older generations as well, there's no going back. There's an understanding that what Israel is and what it has done over the last 77 years, and then what it has done, especially the last 2 years, it'll be hard for the average person to go, oh, okay, they're going to do a short-term ceasefire, and that makes it better somehow. Also, we know from history, Israel will break this ceasefire in a few weeks, and we'll be back to genocide. And all this is a pause in the genocide. It's not the end of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I know you're obviously speaking about growing cynicism of Israel's actions, and we've seen even the groups traditionally close to Israel in the U.S. So if we're talking about Jewish Americans or American Republicans, 61% of American Jews polled think that Israel has committed war crimes in Gaza. We see, Republicans a lot more divided on support for Israel, roughly half having a favorable view of Israel's current government. I wonder then, if these are the kind of numbers coming out of groups traditionally more supportive or sympathetic towards Israel, will future Republican or more conservative presidents have to keep that in mind? We know Trump is very reactive to what his own base is thinking and saying, whether it's Fox News, whether it's previous scandals, which he's been worried about how his base would react. Do you see these shifting numbers as demanding increased responsiveness from U.S. leaders on the subject of Israel?
For Trump, it's impossible to know, right? Because Trump will say one thing one day, and the same day he'll contradict himself, and he'll berate Zelensky, and then he'll praise Zelensky. We don't know which direction he's going to be going in any particular moment. For the average member of the United States Congress, Republican or Democrat, I don't see there being any movement in the next foreseeable future, next few years. I can't imagine them abandoning Israel. Having said that, Gen Z and millennials have really moved against Zionism, and that's especially true amongst young Jewish Americans. They've come to realize that this is a disaster that's being done in their name, and it's not something that they want done at all. So maybe in a couple of decades, after the boomers are gone and the X generation is retired out, maybe we'll finally start to see that kind of momentum that you would need to get something done at the political level in the United States. I don't see anything happening in the immediate future.
It's interesting that you mention Congress. Obviously, in recent years, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, a lobbying group when it comes to Israel, has aggressively increased its operations in U.S. Congress. But we've also seen a growing number of congresspeople in the U.S. Or congressional candidates saying that they will refuse PAC money, including that of AIPAC. We've seen kind of increasing cynicism towards establishment Democrats like Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and so on, who are traditionally thought to be staunch supporters of Israel, certainly Chuck Schumer. I wonder then, and we saw, 2 letters signed by congresspeople earlier with the announcement of a two-state solution recognition, and we saw that 47, I think, congresspeople signed letters in support as opposed to just 30 against among Democrats. So is there a growing movement in Congress that is maybe responsive to public opinion and realizing that actually accepting money from pro-Israel lobbies and taking kind of unclear, fuzzy stances on Israel could actually be more of a liability than an asset when it comes to candidacy and campaigning, especially with a view to 2026 midterms and 28 presidential elections?
I really hope you're right. I really hope that is exactly what happens. The reason, maybe I'm being too cynical, the reason I don't think it'll happen is I think what they'll do is like Great Britain, right? Great Britain has recognized Palestine and has, thrown in with the rest of the world, and they're still sending weapons and money to Israel. It's, we're going to pretend we're doing something, but to placate our own public, but in reality, nothing has changed. It's the same old policies. And I feel like that's what's going to happen with these members of Congress. They might say the right thing to appeal to Gen Z and millennials as they start to vote more and more. But in reality, at least in the immediate future, I don't see a change. But I'm hoping I'm wrong, and I'm hoping you're right, and that we are going to see major changes.
Thank you. I often hope I'm right too. But just on that, on that note, you're obviously speaking in terms of long-term changes. You speak as a historian with a longer view. This moment now that we're in, after 2 years of war, considered by most qualified voices to be a genocide, there are certain images in the minds of people, and you've talked about generational differences. You know, you have an older boomer generation, which, as you've said, looks at Israel and sees the Israel of 1948, right? And then you have the next generation, which sees Israel as that of 1967, not at the state's founding, but in its occupation of historic Palestine. The Israel of 1987, the Israel of the First Intifada. Now, could this be another moment, another differentiating point in history where this generation grows up and does not see the Israel of generations before, but the Israel of 2025? Do you think that that image will look different from the Israel of 1948, and that could have real repercussions in terms of Israel's image around the world? Do you think the conventional narratives we've heard about the state and its founding are beginning to dampen in the public consciousness so long after that the country's origin story?
Yeah, I definitely think that is happening. So, I can talk anecdotally even about this, where I know people who are boomers or even X generation who had been Zionist, who have shifted away from it, and they're starting to critique Israel, and they're not quite as happy with Israel. And then, of course, if you look at my student body, which are Gen Z, they're fiercely anti-Israel. Like this, they are anti-Zionist. They think the state of Israel is an apartheid state that needs to completely be stopped, and we should definitely stop funding it. We should definitely stop supporting it. Definitely stop sending it weapons. Having said that, I can see how this might long-term lead to a waning support for Israel that might turn into real political change in a few years. I don't think there's going to be anything in the immediate future, unless, of course, Trump does something really strange, or there's some kind of moment in the American psyche that really shifts the power, the balance of power. So up until 1987, Ronald Reagan had been really strongly resisting jumping in on the anti-apartheid movement with South Africa, right? Because Reagan, at the end of the day, was very obviously a racist. There's no other way to put it. We have a recording of him talking to President Nixon when he was the governor of California, where he refers to African leaders as monkeys. But by 1987, there was so much pressure on Reagan coming even from his own political party, even from the Republican Party, that Reagan finally did jump onto the anti-apartheid movement. And South Africa almost immediately began secret negotiations with the ANC. Because as soon as that support from the United States went away, there was no way you could sustain the apartheid state. It was finished. And that could definitely happen. I just don't think it's going to happen in the next few years. I think it's a decade out, maybe longer. And in part because, for whatever reason, Israel has captured enough of the political apparatus, its imagination, its devotion, its loyalty, that there would have to be a real sea change in a dramatic way. Like having members of Hollywood jump ship, having Gen Z become, do protests, that's all amazing and it's wonderful. It's just, I don't know, I don't see it going in deep enough. Not yet.
And just on that point then, like you said, you need a real sea change shift, and this is definitely a longer term development. But I guess looking more philosophically at it, the root of these U.S.-Israel ties, is this sense of, what the narrative is shared values and kind of Israel as this bulwark against Islamism or terrorism or whatever evil from the Middle East that the U.S. purports to be defending itself against. But for this generation, they're perhaps less intimately acquainted with memories of that terrorism and more with endless wars in the name of fighting that terrorism. And there was a lot of fear when Israel began its surprise attack on Iran in June that the US could be sucked into that war. And you had this, immediate defensiveness from very conservative Republicans saying kind of Israel is not to lecture us about getting involved across the world. So I wonder then, could part of that trigger for an American shift be once they sense that Israel is no longer a strategic asset, when they don't have that special military relationship, when they fear that they no longer have the same strategic goals and that instead Israel is becoming a strategic liability, it's dragging them into wars they don't want to get involved in, and actually is disrupting rather than developing the US position in the Middle East? Do you think that's an avenue through which growing opposition might develop through quarters that were previously very, very supportive of Israel, especially kind of in the wake of 9/11 and incidents like that?
Yeah, I can definitely see it. There's plenty of reason for a foreign policy analyst to realize that Israel is a liability to the United States and not an asset. And if you look at the state of the Middle East right now, I mean, think about it from this perspective. The Abraham Accords, a lot of the Arab states that signed onto it got a lot of flack for it. Egypt, of course, is the first Arab state to normalize relations with Israel. They were literally kicked out of League of Arab States for a few years. Jordan has gotten a lot of flack for normalizing relations with Israel as well. So the United States managed to push these Arab states into a position where they normalized relations. And then Israel's response to that was 2 years of unmitigated, nonstop genocide and massacring Gaza. And it just made all those Arab states look like they didn't read the room correctly. That Israel wasn't on the verge of becoming a member of the Middle East. It was still this, at the end of the day, this genocidal state, hell-bent on wiping out a whole portion of the Arab world. And so it's forced a lot of those states that are strong U.S. allies to rethink things. But then, to make things worse, Israel then attacks Iran, potentially triggering a regional war that the United States could be dragged into, those Arab allies could be dragged into. Israel really strongly encouraged the 2003 war against Iraq. It's one of the reasons why we do it. It pushed Iraq into the Iran camp, which no Arab state wanted to see happen. The United States shouldn't have wanted to see that happen. Israel then, recently just bombed Qatar, which of course then made every single GCC member wonder why the United States is their ally. Qatar is spending $1 billion a year funding the United States so that the United States will protect it. And then in the same year, they get attacked by Iran and Israel. Like, in what world does that happen where you have this, the U.S. military in your country and there's nothing stopping Iran and Israel from attacking you? And so I think that a rational actor examining U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East can't help but notice that Israel causes way more harm than it does good for U.S. purposes, right? It is completely a liability. It regularly bombs Syria, it regularly bombs Lebanon. It puts the United States in a position where it's funding. It's like this empty hole. You just keep putting billions and billions of dollars into it. There's no possibility of peace as long as the Palestinian population is stuck in this state of permanent refugee, hell. And yet, the American people have gone along with this. The United States Congress has gone along with this. Every president has gone along with this. So even though there's plenty of evidence, and there has been for decades, for 77 years, I would argue, that Israel is a liability, the United States has loyally plugged along. And for the longest time, the United States had that same loyalty with South Africa, and it was like a little triangle. It was like South Africa, Israel, United States, to the point where Israel and South Africa were making nukes together. And the United States was blindly turning and, oh, are you making nukes? We didn't, oh, I didn't see that. And, so at the end of the day, I think maybe I'm being pessimistic, but it's going to take more than rationality to push the United States into the direction of doing the right thing.
I wonder how you think as you've said, the Gulf states were very shocked by by Israel's attack on Iran. How you think the region is viewing this moment? Because obviously it's completely destroyed their credibility over the past 2 years, their inability to stop this war. It's completely, severely undermined their faith in the US's credibility and its ability to create order for many of these Gulf countries that would consider themselves its closest allies. They are now being asked to support a plan which, if it goes well, could rebuild Gaza and provide Palestinian self-determination. If it goes badly, could end up in some kind of protracted occupation and with no real path forward for Palestinian self-rule. So I wonder, how do you think the region is looking at this moment, looking at being supportive of the plan and looking at the threat Israel poses to the region even after this war in Gaza could come to a permanent close?
So I was actually just in Lebanon a couple of months ago, and while I was there, Israel was bombing. We wanted to go to South Lebanon. We decided it was just too high risk. We did go to the Bekaa Valley, and we were in Beirut, and Israel was bombing the Bekaa Valley in Beirut. And so it was like, this is just sort of normal. We're driving along, and the person I'm with says, see that bridge there? Yeah, in 2006, the Israelis blew it up, right? So that's sort of the norm. That is a routine part of Lebanese life, that you're just going to get attacked and bombed. Having said that, I think any rational actor who's a leader in the Middle East, anybody who has any information about the history of Israel knows that this latest peace plan is not going to end in the creation of a two-state solution. It's not going to end in Gaza becoming normalized into the global economy and having human rights. It is Israel's plan to crush Gaza year after year, usually right before an election, so that they can win the next election, right? It's the happy hunting ground for distracting the Israeli public. Thanks for the picture, because it's a good visual. That's the goal. That's Israel's goal. It is to keep Gaza in this permanent state of ruin. They have no intention of letting it come out of this. They are going to use every excuse they can to break the ceasefire in a few weeks, and we'll be right back to where we were. I think the best we can hope for this is just give the Palestinians a break. Like just give them a few days, a few weeks to get food, to get shelter, to store water, to just not be killed, to give birth to babies, like just something so that they can prepare for the next horrific, nightmarish round that we all know is coming. After 77 years, to believe anything else is just purely irrational at this point. We know this isn't going to end in a permanent, long-lasting peace deal. And so I think there's hope, right? And then there's just, we need to give the Palestinians a break. But I think the bottom line, what's really going to be the next steps that the Middle East takes is realizing, like the European Union has, that the United States is no longer a credible and reliable ally. Germany is taking every step it can to replace the United States in NATO. If the Japanese aren't working on making a nuclear weapon right now, they're fools. I think everybody has wrecked Taiwan, needs to figure out, what the next steps are. They need to assume that the United States isn't going to come to their aid. I think the whole world has realized that the U.S. is this irrational, random actor that can't be relied upon. And I just don't know how we replace the U.S. because in our imagination, right, it's Pax Americana. The United States is what Great Britain was 100 years ago. Like this is supposed to be a world where order and calm and stability are set up by the U.S. and all of a sudden the U.S. is out of the picture, and we didn't have time to prepare. We didn't have time to set up the new regime. So
Trump definitely accelerated that.
In our leaders' minds right now.
Yeah. Trump definitely accelerating that process, and the region is no doubt due for an extended period of uncertainty and confusion as they try to make sense of both the Palestinians' future and Israel's stature in the region. Dr. Roy Casagranda, thank you so much for speaking to us and for sharing your insights on what this deal means for Gaza, for Israel, and for the region. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you for having me, and I hope I wasn't too glum.
Well, I fear that you are right and I am wrong, but I hope that I am right and you are wrong. So I think remains to be seen. But what Dr. Casagranda was right about was that the Palestinians do desperately deserve a break after 2 years of war that has destroyed Gaza's infrastructure and, above all, their health infrastructure, which I think you, Matilda, can attest to.
Indeed. On today's extra long live show, we are covering the ceasefire deal. So far, the only phase that has been determined, and even that not in full, is the exchange of prisoners by both sides. But lasting and durable peace would be the second phase of the deal, and the rebuilding of Gaza would take not only durable peace, but massive international investment. We have seen cities leveled to the ground, a generation out of schooling, and 90% of Gaza's 2 million strong population displaced from their homes. And among its most devastated infrastructure is Gaza's healthcare system. At least 94% of all hospitals in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed in what has clearly been a targeted campaign by Israel to destroy the Strip's healthcare system. Some aspects of this, in particular, the bombing of fertility clinics, have been used by an independent UN panel to determine genocidal intent. This targeted bombing of fertility and maternity clinics, as well as the rest of Gaza's healthcare system, has been used as proof of clear genocidal intent to wipe out not just this generation, but a future generation. Now, Mimi Saeed is an American emergency medicine physician. She has worked in Gaza in August and December last year, and she was turned away this year when she attempted to return in August by Israeli authorities. Mimi, welcome to Middle East Eye, and perhaps to start off, could you just give us an overview of this devastation of the healthcare system that we have been trying to describe?
Yes, thanks for having me. It's been, in front of us, live TV for the last 2 years. We've seen the entire healthcare system be destroyed. When I was there in August last year, I thought to myself, there is no possible way that this could get worse. I went back in August and it was in December, and it was significantly worse. When I came back to the United States, it continued to get worse. And the images I'm seeing now from my colleagues on the ground, it's just unimaginable. Recently there was a request to have incubators sent to North Gaza for preterm infants, and that was denied. Over 50% of the requests that are being made are being denied. And things like baby formula. When I was trying to travel back in August for my third medical mission of this year, and I was carrying so much baby formula, medical supplies, medications that are life-saving. Not to mention the skills that we carry, all of us are being denied. Even the doctors that were previously cleared to go back, they were denied entry. And so, again, this is just another form of destroying the population of Gaza, and it's continuing. The ceasefire deal, that's a whole other deal. That's a whole other can that, unfortunately, I don't have any positive feelings about it at this time, just because Israel has a terrible track record of violating ceasefire agreements.
Perhaps you can elaborate on that, because I suppose one thing that the ceasefire deal should ensure for the healthcare system is a pause, if not a stop, in the daily mass casualty events that have been leveling immense pressure on it, on top of the devastation it has been bombarded with by Israeli attacks as well. Would perhaps that relief, that cessation in daily mass casualty events, would that not be cause for celebration?
Yeah, obviously, right? The less deaths, the better. But as we speak, I just received a message from my medical student telling me she's in Gaza City. They just killed 10 people from across the street from her. They dropped a bomb. And this is after ceasefire has been announced. That has officially been announced at 12 p.m. their time. So will it decrease? Maybe a little bit it will decrease, but what's important to understand is the healthcare system doesn't magically stand up just because mass casualty incidents stop. There is an entire destruction of the infrastructure of Gaza. So for example, the roads are destroyed. So to get aid to the hospitals and to the residential areas, you have to be able to drive that aid in. All of that is destroyed. You do have to stop bombing. That also hasn't stopped. Having things like soap and medications and life-saving treatments available, the healthcare force needs to be reinstated. All of those things are necessary in order to build a healthcare system. Basic things like the proper nutrition, that needs to be reinstated. Clean water. Clean water has been a problem in Gaza before October 7th, but it is so significantly worse now. That is so important to mention because, that's one of those indirect reasons for deaths in Gaza unnecessarily. So those are all things that we need to pay attention to that, just with a ceasefire, it doesn't just magically come back. Bulldozers to clear the rubble. This is extremely important. We need heavy machinery. We need shelter. Back in March, this was all supposed to happen. There were supposed to be bulldozers allowed in to clear the rubble, a shelter allowed in, a certain number of sheltering units, and all of that was denied. So, we have yet to see whether Israel upholds the agreement on their side to allow all these things.
And I think something you really point to there is that the damage to individuals, the physical and mental health destruction that has been caused, this has been declared by many independent humanitarian organizations, human rights organizations, media outlets like Middle East Eye, a UN panel. This has been called genocidal warfare. That is not just warfare. That means that the damage that has been done is not just for now, it is for the future. The attacks have been designed to cause lasting damage to the bodies and the livelihoods of the people of Gaza. For example, disability. This has been a mass disabling event. A generation has been, I think the highest level of child amputees is in Gaza. I was recently on the Global Sumud Flotilla reporting for Middle East Eye. This was the flotilla sailing to Gaza. On board, I met a cancer survivor. She told me, I'm sailing to Gaza because I have been disabled. And what I am seeing in front of me is a mass disabling event. We've also seen fertility clinics and reproductive clinics targeted in what the UN independent panel said was an attempt to try and destroy future generations of Palestinians. Who talked to us about what you have witnessed in terms of what distinguishes this war as a medic on the front lines to be a genocidal war.
Yeah, exactly. This is not war. This is not the conventional terms of war. This is absolutely one side is not equal to the other side. This is a superpower against, children. This is an attack on children. Children are supposed to be protected. Women and fertility is supposed to be protected. Disabled people are supposed to be protected. Journalists and hospitals are supposed to be protected. It's the exact opposite in Gaza. Those are the people that are targeted. We have seen it over and over again. Mental health is something that has been put on the back burner, unfortunately. And the reason is because you have these explicit, images coming out with children that are beheaded, children that have, loss of limbs, fetuses that have a gunshot wound in their chest. I mean, unimaginable, just nightmares. And so as a result, mental health takes, a backseat. But it is so incredibly important to point out that children having suicidal ideation is not normal by any circumstance. Small children under the age of 5 should not have suicidal ideation. In fact, under the age of 10 is not normal. This is a regular occurrence in Gaza. All of my colleagues and I have witnessed children who no longer want to live. Just think about that for a moment, what the implications are there. The fear that is instilled in these children, drones flying overhead. This is not new. This is not just after October 7th. Drones have been there for decades. Reconnaissance drones doing surveillance, and children are afraid of those drones. I saw children, when I was at Al-Aqsa playing by a tent, and as soon as they heard a drone come near, they ran and they hid inside of a tent because they know what happens when a drone comes near them. It starts to shoot or it drops a bomb. This is something that's innate in children, this inherent fear from birth, because that's what they're used to. So there is just so much more to talk about when we talk about restoring Gaza, but also very important in this, 20-point ceasefire plan that Trump has proposed. Nowhere in there is there a mention of involving Palestinians to rebuild their state. Palestinians are extremely capable of doing so. They are very able to restore their own state, but no one has involved them in that. There are outside international forces that are going to be involved, but no Palestinians. That's extremely important. The IDF has not really made a statement about withdrawing troops. This is kind of left up to them. They specifically say that when they feel safe, they will withdraw from certain areas. They're saying it plain and clear to everybody in the world that they have no plans to withdraw troops or withdraw their forces. So I hate to be a pessimist, but we have to be realistic here and be cautious.
Mimi Saeed, thank you so much for joining us on MEELive. Now,
thank you.
When we began this live stream at 3 p.m. local time, that was 5 p.m. in Israel, and that was when the cabinet was due to meet to formally approve this ceasefire, which we must emphasize is not actually yet in force. Tamara, can you bring us an update? Because that meeting, I believe, did not go ahead when it was supposed to.
No, so you're correct. The meeting of the Security Cabinet before it goes to the General Government Cabinet was scheduled for 5 p.m. Time in Israel, 3 p.m. here, but it was postponed for an hour and a half because the negotiations over the prisoners list to be released from Israeli jails were still ongoing. That's one of the reasons given by Israel's Channel 12. So they're now beginning that process later, which is why everything has been pushed back. So the full cabinet meeting will now go ahead at 8 p.m. And obviously a solid majority is expected, despite the more ambiguous phrasing of Israeli far-right members of that cabinet. But we're hoping to hear news from this later this evening, even as negotiations are still ongoing. But yes, certainly after an hour and a half's delay, they're currently in there. There is majority support among Israelis for this deal to go ahead, but so much remains up in the air for phase 2, and we know that the Israeli public is a lot more split on what happens in the long-term future. So here to discuss with me the attitudes among not only Israel's political class, but society at large is member of the Knesset, Ofer Kasif. Ofer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again.
So I just want to begin by asking you, we know Israel's Security Cabinet is discussing this now. We know...
Not yet, unfortunately. It was postponed.
Okay, so it's to be finalized later this evening. Now, there is huge support for the release of hostages among Israeli society, but we also see that Israel's government has been quite sheepish about what is to come after. So they're very clear about the immediate release of hostages. And when it comes to phase 2 of the ceasefire, Prime Minister Netanyahu has tried to say that this is the total victory that he's promised. Then you have Smotrich saying, well, we'll get the hostages out, but then maybe we can continue destroying Hamas in the future. How do you think Israeli society feels about the news? Do you think the general feeling in the country is that the objectives of the war have been achieved and that this deal is a reflection of that victory?
I think, as you mentioned before, first and foremost, that the Israeli society is very polarized. And if there's something that it is less polarized, is the wide agreement that this government in general, and Netanyahu in particular, cannot be trusted. So in that sense, I've been in touch today with some of the families of the hostages who are waiting, of course, for their loved ones to come back, and they refuse really to celebrate. They began a slight celebration, but they still want, as one of them said, it's not over until it's over. So there is still some fears. I surely hope that this agreement will be fulfilled in full and beyond. Now, what do I mean by that? First of all, according to this agreement, the first stage says that once the agreement is officially signed by the Israeli government, and as you said, it's supposed to happen tonight, there are 72 hours to release the Israeli hostages, and of course to release also Palestinian hostages and prisoners. And Israel is supposed to withdraw to the yellow line, which is slightly more than it was the original idea of Trump. And then they are supposed to come the next stages, more withdrawal of the occupation forces in Gaza and eventually, I hope, from Gaza. And there is still the negotiations regarding the arms of Hamas. So there are some details which are not still even detailed and let alone agreed upon.
I wonder, do the Israeli public, do they trust Netanyahu and his government to get through those negotiations and finalize a deal? Because from just what I've been seeing in much of, like you said, families of the hostages and some of the Israeli media, is really crediting Trump and Witkoff and others in the US for pulling this agreement together. And we know that Trump and Kushner and Witkoff are set to visit Israel shortly and maybe even visit the hostage and missing families square. But I wonder, do they credit Netanyahu with this deal, and do they trust that he will bring it to its conclusion? Or are they more relying on the US to get them there? Because there has been certainly, I don't want to say not much gratitude, but not much excitement or enthusiasm about Prime Minister Netanyahu's role from what I've seen, though that may be incorrect.
That's a nice understatement. I appreciate it. But I love understatements. No, I can say loud and clear that the vast majority of the Israeli population do not trust Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a serial liar. Everybody knows that. He's been lying time and time again, not only to the Palestinians, to the American administrations, and I said that in purpose, I use the term administrations in plural. And he also been lying to the Israeli public and to the families of the hostages for 2 years. So obviously, you can find a tiny minority that still trusts him, and this is the cult of Netanyahu. There's no Likud party anymore. There is a cult, and this cult, follows the leader like the Piper of Hamelin. So that's not surprising. The vast majority do not trust him, and many trust Trump and his administration to force Netanyahu to go forward. Now, I must say that as far as I am concerned, I do not trust the American imperialism in general and this specific administration in particular at all. I do trust much more the combination that was created, in which there are many other actors. Whether I like them or not, that's irrelevant. But the balance of interests and the partnership of or the common interests make me believe that this agreement is going to be fulfilled. Not only the release of the Israeli hostages, which of course I'm happy about, but also the next stages, including the withdrawal of the occupation forces from Gaza, the reconstruction of Gaza, the ability of the people of Gaza to live normal lives, to get back their lives, those who survived this catastrophic genocide. I believe that will be materialized, but we still need pressure. It won't come by itself.
I wonder, though, regardless of US pressure, obviously we know that securing the release of the hostages has been the main driving force in terms of Israeli protests for a ceasefire deal to end this war. Once that has been finalized, is there really a demand among the Israeli public, among Israeli politicians, for an Israeli military withdrawal from the Strip? We've certainly seen Netanyahu trying to downplay that element of the deal and adding, new dimensions to Trump's plan. I mean, what's to say that there won't be considerable domestic pressure if they feel, you know what, you promised us the destruction of Hamas and this is not that, and we have our hostages back and you can now finish the job? And what if, say, for example, US President Trump, having received his Nobel Peace Prize, no longer cares what happens in Gaza? Do you see that as a possibility, or do you think there is enough war wariness among Israelis and among reservists and so on that actually they want to put this conflict to rest?
First of all, obviously, Netanyahu downplays whatever serves him, as he does with any other thing. So, of course, he did, and he would if he thinks that serves him and his interests. So, as I said before, I do not trust him. I do not trust his government and coalition. I have no expectations from there. There are mostly fascist fanatics there who don't care about the lives of anyone, neither the Israelis nor, of course, let alone the Palestinians. So I do trust the interest of those who are involved. And it's not that I trust Trump. I already said I do not trust Trump as a person, and I do not trust the American administration given its history and record, which is one of the worst. Since the end of the Second World War, I dare say that the American different administrations were the worst on earth, whether vis-a-vis the so-called Far East or Latin America or etc. etc.
But I mean, regardless of US pressure and regardless of Netanyahu's unreliability, would that return to war be something that within Israel is supported, regardless of the fickleness of both governments?
First of all, within Israel, as I already mentioned a few days ago, I think it was with you too, that there was a shift in the public opinion. We are not the majority, far from that, but we are not a tiny minority like we used to be before, when we were standing in the different shifts and demonstrations with pictures of children from Gaza who were murdered by Israel. In the beginning, we were very few, but eventually, in the last few demonstrations, our bloc against the occupation, against the genocide, consisted of, across the country, of thousands of people, and in Tel Aviv itself, of hundreds of people, if not more than that. So, if, alas, and perish the thought, after the first stage, Israel begins to play with tweaks that it did before, as it did before. I believe that within the Israeli public, you see not huge demonstrations like we've been witnessing in the last 2 years, but you will see a pressure from the streets too, and from the international community. But that's what I want to say. The international community, especially the wonderful, wonderful people who took to the streets across the globe to protest against the persecution of the flotilla, against the continuation of the genocide, continue. You must continue. Don't give up and don't stop until it is over. Don't stop. Continue with the pressure on your own governments and force them to force the Israeli government to respect the agreement and not to violate and undermine it after the first stage. I do fear, I'm not confident at all that the Israeli government will respect it, but I hope so, and I trust other factors to force the Israeli government to do so. So in that respect, I'm relatively optimistic.
I wonder then, Netanyahu has spent the past 2 years as a wartime prime minister, while several senior officials around him have resigned over failures of October 7th. He has remained in place, saying he needs to lead the country right now in its war. If this ceasefire deal is finalized and pushed through, and Israel is no longer a country at war, where does Netanyahu go from here? I mean, he has gone militarily all over the region in the past 2 years in terms of wars and military campaigns. But Where does he see his future? I mean, is he hoping that this deal will set him up with some grand total victory that will allow him to sail through the 2026 elections next year in Israel? Is he hoping that the credit he can take for it will be enough to overcome his real failure in preventing October 7th? How does he look at this moment politically in terms of his political future, his coalition's future, given the far-right members in his government? What do you think he sees right now?
First of all, he continues with his lies in order to keep his support and to keep his allies in the coalition. Even Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the vast majority of the members of Netanyahu's party at the Knesset and as well in the government and the cabinet, they, even if some of them, most of them didn't even criticize, but embraced this agreement, and they said that it was a great victory of the great leader Netanyahu. This is a sham, of course, but it's not. It doesn't matter at the moment. And just few expressed reservations or even opposition to the agreement, but some of them will not vote against it. And if some will, they are going to be a tiny minority. So in that sense, Netanyahu at the moment feels quite safe about the stability of his coalition. What I foresee is that after achieving the support of the cabinet and the government to the first stage, because today they are going to vote only on the first stage, not on the agreement as a whole. And because of that, I'm still worried, but I still said before why I'm still optimistic. I'm pretty sure that Netanyahu will do something to bring the elections forward, perhaps to next February. He'll do that, and he'll try to use the current situation to present this agreement, which was clearly forced upon him by Trump. He will definitely present this agreement as his own success. And because of that, he will probably like to bring the elections forward and to use those opportunities and those manipulations to get support. And he may succeed. Hopefully not, but he may succeed. I think that's the tactics that he's planning now.
Just lastly, obviously, it's a fool's errand to try and predict Netanyahu's political destiny, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, the king of political comebacks in the country. As you said, he may try to move elections forward. Do you think he will be successful in doing so, or do you think that this war has forever tarnished the prime minister's reputation, credibility, reliability in the eyes of the Israeli public, especially over that kind of unspoken pact of promising to always bring Israeli people home if captured? Do you think that has changed his image irrevocably? And I guess if so, what political alternative is there, if any?
This is a great question, and I think it's not only up to Netanyahu, it's up to those who are supposed to be the opposition. What we've been witnessing in the last 2 years, and even in the year before under this fascist government, is that there was almost no real opposition. I mean, apart from us, Hadash, Ta'al, and to some extent Ra'am, the Islamic Party, and here and there some individuals from Labour, there was no opposition. Most of the time, and the vast majority of the opposition, so-called, presented an alternative to Netanyahu on a personal level rather than a political level. And they refrained continuously from dealing with the main issue, which is the ongoing occupation. I'm talking even before the massacre of October 7th. If they continue with this, so Netanyahu may have success, because the main problem is not the Netanyahu as a genius. Many people say, look at him, he's a genius. No, he's not. The problem is the alternatives. Those who are supposed to pose an alternative do not do that. That's the reason it's been successful for so many years, unfortunately. But so if they continue with that, he will succeed again. If we want to move not only him, but to move him and his politics, we must introduce a real alternative. And a real alternative boils down to one main issue: Palestinian liberation, ending of the occupation, and statehood of the Palestinians. That's what we have to embrace, because it's just, because it's democratic, because it is on the Israeli interest too, and because that's the only thing that may introduce a real alternative to Netanyahu and his allies.
Certainly. Let's hope that this could be a watershed moment for that kind of a political horizon for Palestinians,
Absolutely.
although it seems very far away at the moment. Ofer Kassif, member of the Israeli Knesset, thank you so much for making the time to speak to us on this very, very busy and uncertain time. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. For the best. Let's hope for the best.
So obviously many long-term questions about Israel and its occupation of Palestinian territory's future. At the moment, though, all eyes are on the next few hours. Will Israel's cabinet ratify this deal? Will we see a long-awaited captive exchange between Israel and Gaza? So much is yet to be determined. And here to break that process down for us is Matilda. Over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. Now, hello for anyone who has joined us since this show began. Today's live show is all about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. As it stands, that deal remains incomplete. Israel has postponed final approval, which was supposed to come from its cabinet earlier this afternoon. We are watching that progress. And Gaza, in the meantime, is still being bombed. And much is yet to be agreed anyway for this deal to achieve anything close to the strong, durable, and everlasting peace that US President Donald Trump claims it will. But the key agreement focus of Phase 1 is a mutual release of prisoners. Throughout the 2-year war and genocide, the fates of the 251 Israelis captured during the Hamas-led 7th of October attack has been central to the war's reception within Israel and the West. But what has received far less global attention is the fates of the thousands of Palestinian detainees being held in Israeli prisons. Nearly 10,000 Palestinians are currently in prison, over a third of them without charge or trial. Such arbitrary abduction and detention has skyrocketed since October the 7th. This has occurred across both the occupied Gaza Strip and West Bank, and the number of political prisoners in Israeli jails has more than doubled since the war began. This ceasefire, as Phase 1, agrees to releases on both sides. Hamas has agreed to release all remaining captives from the October 7th attack. The 20 believed to still be alive will be released within 72 hours of the ceasefire's official start time. And in turn, Israel has agreed to release 1,950 detained Palestinians, including 250 serving life sentences. Their identities, however, have not been finalized. This, we believe, is central to the delay currently coming from Israel's side. Hamas has previously stated, however, that certain individuals are non-negotiable. These individuals Israel considers to be terrorists and has historically always flatly declined to their release. So the key name to watch is Marwan Barghouti. Marwan Barghouti is an incredibly popular figure among Palestinians and widely considered a heroic political prisoner and a unifying potential leader. The 66-year-old was detained in 2002 for his role in the West Bank Intifada that erupted in 2000. Israel accuses him of orchestrating fatal attacks, accusations to which he did not respond during his trial as a refusal to recognize the legitimacy of Israel's court. Another name is Ahmed Sadat. the leader of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, accused by Israel of assassinating ultra-nationalist minister Rehevim Zivi in 2001. He was abducted by Israel from the West Bank jail to which he had been transferred under an internationally brokered agreement. Other Palestinian detainees high on Hamas's list include several senior Hamas figures, including Abdullah Barghouti, a senior bomb maker who carries the longest sentence in Israeli history of 67 life sentences. These are just some of the Palestinian individuals to watch in the hours and the days that follow. Now, something that I have noted is that the situation for Palestinian captives in Israel has been fairly absent from global media coverage during the reporting of this war and of this ceasefire. This is particularly notable given how we see today that it stands absolutely at the forefront of issues and negotiations to end the war. So why has the global public, and Western audiences in particular, learnt so little about the situation of Palestinian detainees from their legacy news outlets? This brings us on to our next topic of discussion. There are many agents of war in what has been labelled by many outlets the Israel-Hamas war, even though Palestinian civilians have been the primary targets. And one thing that history teaches us is that genocide cannot occur without the media playing some part, a role in dehumanizing the victimized group or desensitizing the world to its suffering. If this ceasefire is the beginning of the end of the genocide, what will come next is a reckoning. One outspoken voice calling for a media reckoning is British filmmaker Richard Sanders. He joins us now. Richard, welcome to MEELive.
Hi there, thank you for having me.
Now, for something like this has happened, this war that we have witnessed over the past 2 years, a genocide that implicates so many different countries, how important is the media as an enabler?
It is massively important. I mean, I made a film with Al Jazeera's investigative unit about October the 7th, the events of October the 7th. And the basic point we made in that film was, well, we certainly acknowledged very, very serious human rights crimes were committed that day. The main media focus was actually on things that didn't happen, above all the beheading of babies and so on, and also the allegation of widespread and systematic rape. Now, these allegations were terribly important because they were what we used to sort of whip up emotions and mobilize support and sort of gain legitimacy for the Israelis' actions in the Gaza Strip. Now, it perhaps rather predictable, very predictable that the Israeli government should come out with these allegations, very predictable that the Israeli media should echo these allegations. What was really quite startling was the way they were then echoed in the Western media. There was a complete lack of scrutiny. And these stories and these allegations that we used to facilitate genocide were just allowed to go through without any of the normal scrutiny that you would expect.
And have you seen any improvements since many of the claims first printed by media outlets, claims made by propagandists, since those claims were falsified very near the start of this war? Would you say that the media has learned its lesson and taken a more cynical approach to reprinting claims made by Israeli military and government spokespeople?
Well, not massively. With the babies, the allegation of murdered babies and so on, you still hear that repeated, although it's been disproven. Less so these days. But widespread and systematic rape, it's still the case that it's considered absolutely beyond the pale to even question that one. So, there hasn't really been a change there. And also throughout the conflict, it's been extraordinary, the degree to which, certainly say the BBC, will repeat Israeli claims and denials and so on without any sort of caveats to give their viewers a clear idea of how reliable these are likely to be. I mean, Israeli claims and denials for years and years have proven to be extremely unreliable. And normally, conventionally, if you're dealing with a source that just regularly lies to you, then you begin to reflect that in the way you report what they say. And this just doesn't happen with the Israelis. It's extraordinary.
And it's difficult to make a comparison about how the media has treated Palestinian authorities because, of course, when it comes to Gaza and the authority of Hamas, this generally isn't consulted or printed or mentioned at all by many media outlets. Do you think that that has been a cause for concern regarding the coverage?
Yes, I mean it's appallingly one-sided. The obvious thing is that the BBC and others continue to refer to the Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry when giving figures for casualties. Now, are they saying these figures are unreliable or not? There is absolutely no reason to think the figures are unreliable. They've been checked out over the years many times by numerous international bodies, including the UN. In the current conflict, it's quite clear that these figures are a massive underestimate. So why does the BBC continue to attach that caveat to figures out of the Gaza Health Ministry, which clearly carries the implication that they are unreliable?
I suppose a pattern we could draw from what you've just described as occurring in the media and the lack of Palestinian voices, Palestinian testimonies, Palestinian authorities having an equal voice to Israeli authorities in the coverage. Well, that's what we've looked at with the drawing up of the ceasefire deal. While Hamas has agreed to phase one, the negotiations did not include not only Hamas, but indeed any senior Palestinian voices, I believe any Palestinian voices at all. What does this lack of representation of Palestinian people in global media, what does that say about wider issues with the voice given to Palestinians regarding the fate of Palestine?
I think it reflects a profound racism, and invariably when Palestinians are allowed on to Western media, they're not so much interviewed as interrogated. This has improved a bit over the course of the genocide, and there are certain Palestinian voices you do see getting onto the media. I would say another thing that actually is really shocking, certainly in Britain, is the Jewish voices that get on. And really, this is in its own way actually quite anti-Semitic. To watch the BBC, you would have the impression that the British Jewish community is entirely united in support of Israel, which clearly isn't the case. Very, very significant numbers of British Jews do not identify with Israel, and a very significant minority of British Jews are actively anti-Zionist these days. You would have no idea that is the case from watching the BBC. And I think the BBC does a great disservice to the British Jewish community by creating the impression that they are all supportive of this genocidal apartheid state.
Now, something else that you have criticised regarding the media is the industry's response or lack of response to the systematic killing of Palestinian journalists by Israel over the course of this war. Talk to us about that.
It really is absolutely appalling, the response of the West to the killing Palestinian journalists. We're looking here at a slaughter of journalists without parallel in modern history. And what is particularly dreadful is the way when the Israelis claim, say my colleagues at Al Jazeera, we've lost 11 journalists, when the Israelis claim that these people are members of Hamas or are Hamas fighters and so on, it is very, very clear that they are testing the waters. They are seeking to see who is killable and who isn't. That effectively these things are death threats. And it is massively irresponsible of Western media then to report it as a they say, he says they say story, that Al Jazeera denies this, but this is what the Israelis say, which gives it a certain level of legitimacy. And in the context where we know that the Israelis will kill journalists again and again and again, often with their family members, it seems to me appallingly irresponsible. You just have to look at the comparison. If this was the Russians killing Ukrainian journalists, and proportionately to be equivalent, that would mean many, many thousands of journalists being killed as a proportion of the population. Now, if that was happening, Western media organizations would organize. They'd organize a boycott. They'd refuse to carry Israeli statements. They'd find ways of bringing pressure on the Israelis. There isn't even a suggestion that should happen with Palestinian journalists. And frankly, again, it reflects a profound racism.
Richard Sanders, thank you so much for joining us and talking us through the media issues regarding what has led up to this ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we go on to our final guests, Tamara and I think we'll have a little run through of the people that we have spoken to on the show so far and what they have told us. This show, for anyone joining us late, is of course a deep dive into the ceasefire deal that Israel and Hamas, we were told this morning, had agreed to. However, Israel is yet to put the final stamp of approval on it, and it is yet to commence. Tamara, we started off rounding up the key points of the ceasefire. Perhaps you could do that for us again.
Yep, for sure. So obviously we're looking at the first phase of that to take place within the next 72 hours. US President Trump has just said in a recent White House press conference that they expect the Israeli hostages to be released on Monday or Tuesday, at which point Israel's military will withdraw to about 53% of the Strip once those hostages are released. And then we have future withdrawals scheduled for phase 2 of the agreement, which would also see Hamas disarm and hand over governance of Gaza to and this is where the sticking point is, technocratic committee. Now, Hamas says that it wants it to be a Palestinian technocratic committee, given Gaza's population is Palestinian. And then there has been the Israeli and US side calling for this kind of board of peace chaired by Trump, of which Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, would be a member, and then kind of with hand-picked officials of their choosing. So the first part of the deal is what we're waiting to hear about now, which is which Palestinian prisoners will be released from Israeli jails. It's meant to be 1,950 in total, 250 with life sentences. And I think some key Palestinian figures whom Hamas has really lobbied to release. We're talking about, of course, Palestinian Unity figure Marwan Barghouti. Israel has resoundingly blocked. And so I think while we're ironing out the final idea of who will be on those lists, that's why we are waiting for Israel's cabinet to approve so far.
Thank you so much, Tamara. Now, those are the key terms, conditions of the deal. Something that we've looked into on this show are the implications and the predictions of whether this deal will be lasting. We heard, for example, from Norman Finkelstein, American political scientist. He was very, very cynical that this would be anything more than a temporary ceasefire that would be exploited by Israel to its advantage to secure the release of the hostages, but then to ultimately resume militancy against Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah. A lot of cynicism among commentators, Dr. Roy Casagrande as well, that Israel would simply release some hostages like in January and then return to war at a time of its choosing, as it did in March. So definitely a wait and see moment, but a much needed break for Gaza and its people.
Absolutely. But while these individuals have said that this ceasefire doesn't necessarily look very different to previous ceasefires that have fallen through, David Hurst, MEE's editor-in-chief, he pointed out, well, it is fundamentally different in at least one way, in that this ceasefire comes after 2 years of genocide. And in his view, the ceasefire doesn't represent the political victory for Israel that Netanyahu has said that it does, because Israel's reputation has been catastrophically damaged in the last 2 years, and that he believes that public anger and attention on the situation for Palestinians, that will not be diminished by the ceasefire or distracted by the ceasefire, and that pressure on conditions for Palestine to improve will only increase. Actually, you heard from Roy a little bit about how that might even be coming from US political elites.
Certainly. It does appear that we've passed a point of no return in terms of public attitudes towards Israel. And, we even have Israeli members of the Knesset like Ofer Kassif saying, this global movement has begun. And many Israelis like himself are kind of relying on the continuation of that international pressure in order to ensure that actually this deal is seen through and that we do see a route to Palestinian self-determination rather than that self-rule just being endlessly deferred. Because certainly the situation in Gaza is catastrophic and in the occupied West Bank only seems increasingly bleak. So I think the priority is to get the aid into Gaza, to start rebuilding. Its healthcare networks, its infrastructure has been just completely destroyed by the past 2 years. And then to actually think about how Palestinian governance proceeds going forward, I think, which, as we've heard, asking Hamas to disarm and then kind of having a vague timeline for military withdrawal, I think isn't going to cut it for a lot of Palestinians, as we heard Azam Tamimi say.
Yeah. We also heard from Mimi Saeed, a medic who has repeatedly been in Gaza, emphasizing that the damage that has been done to Palestinians in Gaza has long-lasting consequences that are by no means addressed by this ceasefire. Now, one person who has just left Gaza is James Elder, UNICEF's global spokesperson and someone who's made repeated visits to the Strip throughout this war and genocide. James, welcome to MEELive. What can you tell us about the state of the humanitarian situation in Gaza today, having just left?
Look, it's a rock bottom. Every day is accumulation. The difference today, as you've been listening to, of course, is that one thing Palestinians have agency over, which is hope. So they have that in abundance. And today's been a good day, of course. There's been real joy. There's a sense from families that maybe the bombardments stop, maybe humanitarian aid flows, maybe they get to go home. So in that sense, whether it was people celebrating at Nasser or me driving through Gaza and seeing children, smiling from ear to ear, it's been a very good day. Palestinians, of course, know that it's fragile. They know how many things can go wrong. But look, they've had so much taken away from them. Their loved ones, their homes, their ability to protect their children, their ability to feed their children. Hope is the one thing that they have got. So today, of course, is a very hopeful day. Today shows something, the foundations of what may be to come.
Now, hopefully before the end of the show, we will be going live to Gaza to get some more of that perspective. But James, something you can really speak to, given your role in UNICEF, is the situation with aid. This ceasefire deal, phase one, it agrees very little. But one of the things it does agree is that aid will enter the Strip, beginning with 400 trucks and increasing to 600 trucks per day. Is this enough?
Well, it's a lot more than it's been. So, counting trucks is perilous. A lot of damage has been done. You have a famine. When you have malnutrition on children, it's not just their physical state, it's stunting its cognitive decline. You've got large numbers of women who are giving birth prematurely or to underweight babies because they too are malnourished. So let's just go back to the ceasefire days. Let's get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trucks for a sustained period of time, not for a week, not for 7 weeks, but for the foreseeable future. That's what's required right now. I mean, an agency like UNICEF, it's been frustrating, but we know exactly what needs to be done. We have got those super cereals for mums and children sitting on the wrong side of the border. We want to bring in 1 million blankets. Let's not forget that the first rains hit Gaza today. Very gentle, but it's a sign. So we want to get every child under 10 years of age, winter clothing kit and shoes. It's about tents. It's about tarpaulins. We've got thousands and thousands of assistive devices for all the wounded children that, again, have been blocked, things like wheelchairs and crutches. So UN agencies, brave partners on the ground, know what needs to be done. We're not going to go back into counting trucks and having blockades by Israel and being told that enough is coming in. I think we've moved past that. There is a famine. This is not a logistical problem. That is purely a political problem. We heard one of your previous guests speaking about that the way this has been reported, this has been as well an information war. So we're in a place now where, a government accused of systematic breaches of international humanitarian law, and even when that government's past denials are proven false, the voice is still somehow treated as indispensable in balancing, quote unquote, a story. That's given a platform to those engineering starvation. Humanitarian aid has been denied, and that has cost lives. That needs to stop, and that's what one of the things this agreement promises.
Also, what we have seen throughout this war is an incredibly deadly delivery of aid. The aid that has been distributed has been done so at militarized sites where there have been daily shootings. We have seen aid weaponized to serve Israel's goal of, for example, moving the population of Gaza to the south. Is there any optimism that under this ceasefire deal, with the increase of aid, the conditions with which that aid is delivered will also improve?
Well, the conditions when humanitarians, when those who are trained in neutrality and impartiality, when they deliberate, as we saw in the ceasefire, people aren't being killed when they're accessing a UNICEF nutrition site or a World Health Organization health site. That's simply not the case for a couple of reasons. One is that those aid workers are trained in the delivery. Two, we had in the ceasefire 400 sites. So humanitarian aid at its purest is about two things. One, going to where the people need it. So again, 400 sites during the ceasefire. UNICEF at times was even going door to door for malnutrition. The other thing is making sure you're reaching the most vulnerable. So making sure that you are targeting the most vulnerable and then seeing a change. You're seeing malnutrition change. You're seeing an increase in water. You're seeing a decrease in disease. We saw all those things. Now, the idea, as you said, that things like the GHF, I mean, that was 4 sites. It was militarized. It was large numbers of people killed trying to access aid. That the only humanitarian part of that was in its name. Nothing else spoke to the way aid should be delivered, not in a sense of safety, not in a sense of reaching the most vulnerable, and certainly not in a sense of giving dignity to those people who require that humanitarian assistance.
Also, James, I suppose you and I are at risk in this conversation, and not just you and I, but the world more generally, of assuming that aid is a good thing. But of course, depending on aid means that someone does not have self-determination, does not have the ability to feed themselves. What does it say that Gaza is to remain dependent on aid under this deal? Is that something you feel you can speak to?
I don't think Gaza will be dependent on aid. I mean, prior to this war, the vast majority of agricultural products were grown within Gaza, immensely rich agricultural soil, and of course, ocean and fisheries all over. And Gaza, famously known for things like strawberries, but more so was feeding a population. So, both in terms of its agriculture, both in terms of its fisheries, and certainly in terms of an education rate, whether that is architects, whether that is farmers, whether that's doctors or nurses or teachers, that's always been one of the bedrocks and prides of Gaza, one of the highest literacy rates. So right now, humanitarian aid is essential because all those elements, agriculture, the economy, healthcare, they've all been under attack. Now, whenever that occurs, yes, a population requires humanitarian aid, but I think if sustained humanitarian aid is enabled and then big rebuilding of healthcare, big rebuilding of sanitation, Gazans, Palestinians will take care of education as long as the bombs stop falling. There is an immense ability for people to bounce back. That's at risk of sounding like a cliche. It's not. The reason we saw in the ceasefire such a quick response, Shifa Hospital being rebuilt, people on day 2 having cappuccino and cakes in coffee shops, that's on the back of a foundation. That foundation is education. That is something Palestinians, irrespective of how many atrocities they've been hit with over the past 10, 20 plus years, they have always put a primary focus on education, and that pays immense dividends. That will happen again, but it's why this ceasefire simply has to hold. We can't go to a point again where we're back in this situation, and again children are being denied that access to school. Again, we're seeing that level of devastation. Education, we talk a lot about hope. Education is hope in the future. That's what education is. Education says there will be a future. We have to ask why Israel was denying education as part of a humanitarian response. Palestinians will be the first to ensure those children are in classes and so on and so on. But again, they need the conditions like any other people, any other place, of safety, security, protection and dignity.
James Elder, it's been great to have you as usual. Thank you so much for joining us on MEELive.
Pleasure, thanks.
It is clear that the world wants an end to Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, and the tentative promise of peace has been well received, if prematurely, given that we are still waiting for that final approval from Israel's cabinet. However, some things cannot be undone. Over 2 years of war, Israel's attacks have killed over 67,000 people in Gaza, including almost 20,000 children. 169,000 people have also been severely wounded or maimed for life, a mass disabling event that will impact Palestinians' ability to rebuild. And still, thousands are missing and many presumed buried under rubble. 460 Palestinians have died due to man-made famine and hunger, including 154 children. Israel has forcibly displaced at least 90% of Gaza's 2 million population. A generation has been left without schooling, and cities have been leveled to the floor. Our final guest today is tuning in from Gaza. Asim Nabeh is the media director at Gaza Municipality. Asim, welcome to MEELive.
Yeah, thank you for having me tonight.
And can you tell us how news of the ceasefire has been received in Gaza today?
To be honest, there is no ceasefire yet in this city. In the past 20 minutes, there were more than 5 explosions. I counted myself. Why? I'm sure there is other explosions in another neighborhoods. We can't say that there is a calmness in the city, while many people around the world circulating the news about ceasefire. The people in Gaza are still suffering from different and difficult circumstances in terms of bombardment, in terms of food insecurity, in terms of water scarcity, in terms of massive destruction in the infrastructure and civic facilities. Today, after 2 years of genocidal war in Gaza, there is a water scarcity. Can you imagine that there is more than 75% of the total water wells in Gaza have been destroyed, and people now are getting less than 25% of the total daily needs of water. The international standard stated that every person needs more than 100 liters daily. This is for drinking, for showering, for bathing, for all the essential and basic needs, while people in Gaza are getting less than 20 liters daily for all of the human needs. And this is only one part of the suffering, you know. Today I walked in the streets looking for some food. There is nothing actually on the market. You can find some limited options with the price that most of people in Gaza can't afford it. While we talk about a cash crisis in the city. So while everyone is talking about ceasefire in Gaza, Gazans can't feel that comfort that there is a ceasefire in the city right now.
Firstly, I'm very sorry to hear that. That is the situation that you're still enduring. Do you believe if the ceasefire does come into play and you do see a cease in the violence, that it will be well received by Palestinians in Gaza?
We dreamed about this this time. We dreamed about ceasefire and peace for 2 years. We paid precious sacrifices in the past 24 months. And we believe that we deserve a ceasefire. We deserve to feel free. We deserve to get our freedom and our rights. But ceasefire is not the main goal right now. You know, the situation in Gaza and West Bank and all the Palestinian lands is miserable. The world should listen to us and hear our voices. We screamed, we called for our rights. We demand our freedom, our self-determination on our land, and that's what the world should do for us. Ceasefire is only the first step that we deserve, you know, after the the past 24 unbelievable months that every Gazan and every Palestinian in Gaza and in West Bank faced, actually. So we are looking for the ceasefire agreement. We would love to enjoy the peace. We would like to rebuild our city. We have a lot of good engineers and workers. We are dreaming about that time that we could rebuild it and reconstruct our city, but this is not only the main objective. The leaders of the world should respect our sacrifices and give us our freedom, our self-determination, and at least bring peace to this land after these huge sacrifices.
So may I ask if there are any particular points with this ceasefire that you, as a Palestinian in Gaza, would flag as causes for criticism, causes for global concern?
There's a lot actually to be mentioned in this topic, but the first thing came to my mind that we should care about the children in Gaza. The education is one of the main and of the most important topics that we need to mention and to focus and to care about in the near future. Our children didn't take any classes or any school in the past 2 years. We should start fixing their schools. We should start do an urgent programs and projects to solve this issue. This is one topic. Another thing related with water, because everyone is talking about the famine and the starvation in the city, and they talk about 400 trucks that might enter Gaza when the ceasefire started, but also we need in the municipality, we need a lot of special needs like heavy vehicles, sufficient amount of fuel. We need spare parts and maintenance equipment to start the process to fix and maintain the infrastructure in the city. Otherwise, people would, unfortunately, suffer even after the ceasefire, because if we didn't get that needs, especially the heavy vehicles and the other engineering needs, the people would suffer from water scarcity even more. We will not be able to remove the rubbles in the streets, among the streets and among the city. We won't be able to fix the water networks and the sewage pumps. So this is one of the most concerns now for us as engineers and municipality staff. And we called actually, and we sent that list, the needs list, to the NGOs, to the UN organizations, to our partners around the world. And they promised us that after the ceasefire, they would provide us with these essential needs. But I want to be clear in this. If the municipality will not get these needs, the suffering of people will continue even after the ceasefire.
Asim Nabi, thank you for those closing words and that closing message from Gaza.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, we are just in the closing minutes of our show, but I think that's really something worth highlighting as a final conclusion, that celebrations of this ceasefire around the world may be as yet premature.
Yeah,
Tamara.
I mean, I think obviously an end to bombing and to this war is welcome, but there is so much that needs to happen here before life can resume for Palestinians in Gaza. We're talking about a real surge of aid that's needed, an end to Israel's blockade of items as trivial as peanut butter or nutritional supplements or baby formula, which it has withheld during its war on Gaza. As was mentioned, plumbing and infrastructure and engineering, there is so much that when you focus on the fighting itself, there is so much in terms of the actual necessities of life that I think are forgotten during this period because they don't grab headlines as much and they don't have as much international attention. But that was really a sobering reminder of, okay, you've announced a deal, but how are you actually going to get Gaza up and running again after what has been a relentless 2-year attempt to destroy it?
And of course, there's the central message that Palestinians must be involved, that this must be a Palestinian-led solution. Palestinians must be included in the media coverage, in the negotiations, and under international law, there must be Palestinian self-determination. That is all that we have time for today, but thank you so much for joining us here on MEELive. Please do send in your thoughts and your questions at Middle East Eye across social media or by emailing meelive@middleeasteye.net.